Hey everyone, Kibler here, and today I want to talk a bit about the recent announcement about the upcoming changes to Classic and the introduction of the core set and Classic format in Hearthstone. And specifically, why I feel like this change is perhaps one of the biggest and best changes that has ever come to Hearthstone. And not just because it's something that I've personally advocated for years. For those who might not know, for a very long time, I have argued that Hearthstone should basically get rid of the Classic set and replace it with a core set. Essentially, the argument being that a static set of cards in the form of the Classic set means that Hearthstone as a game is fairly static, that you have a ton of things that just are part of the game forever, and you get people who are tired of playing against and with the same things over and over the course of years. Also, the argument being that the Classic set was the first set that Hearthstone ever made, and kind of pinning the entire future of the game to the Classic set when the designers know the least about how their game works makes very little sense just from a design perspective. It makes a lot more sense to adapt and change things as time goes on and give you the opportunity to get rid of cards that may be problematic, which they've done to some extent with nerfs and buffs and the Hall of Fame, but also to introduce other cards on a regular basis that don't have the same problems as some of the cards that may have existed when the Classic set was first introduced. And that's what they're doing. I have argued for this for many years. Made a video, the Classic set problem for Omni Slash back in 2018. But that was like the culmination of many years of talking about this as an issue, both with sort of the public in the Hearthstone community in general, as well as with people on the Hearthstone team individually. And I certainly don't want to take any credit for this happening. I think that this is not like a revolutionary idea. I'm not saying they did this because I said so. I think that the rationales that I have put forward for a very long time about this are just things that also make sense to other people who work or have worked in game design. So I am, while I am kind of like, snarkily satisfied, jokingly calling myself the core set prophet and whatever, I don't think I did this or anything like that. So before you call me, conceited, narcissistic, whatever, while that may be true in other contexts, not because of this. But anyway, so yeah, what is going on with the core set? The core set that's being introduced is going to be a bunch of returning cards, which is the idea of the core set being, you have some stuff that can come and go, right? It's more malleable. Every year you can update it. You can have cards that go away. Say you're like, all right, well, just for example, like Blizzard, right? We're like sick of Blizzard always being in, not sick of Blizzard the company, despite them being around for 30 years, but Blizzard the card, let's just say, you're sick of like Freeze Mage being the kind of deck that you play every single year, the play pattern of freezing your opponent's entire board all the time. I'm sick of it, right? We don't want to see this all the time, right? We want to have a environment in Standard where you don't just have every mage who wants to play Control playing Blizzard because it's so effective at shutting down your opponent's board. You can introduce new stuff and get rid of Blizzard for a while. You can still have, say, Frostbolt and Fireball and Arcane Intellect because those are core things that Mage does, but without necessarily having kind of the otherwise somewhat oppressive feeling play pattern of area effect freezes on your opponent's stuff. Similarly, like, Gadgets and Auctioneer is a card that has been in the Classic set. It eventually got nerfed, but has, just repeatedly crops up as being the centerpiece of combo decks over and over and over every time there's a bunch of low zero cost things, whether it's Mozaki, whether it's Jade Druid, whatever. All these things lead to this card, because it's always around, kind of being this centerpiece, the same thing of these decks every single time they crop up, right? And that card can just go away for a while. Maybe you introduce it again later on, it can rotate back in, and that's how this is happening, right? There's a bunch of cards, I think it's a total of like 140-ish cards that are going to be returning from existing Classic and Basic. Then there's a bunch of cards that are coming in from Wild, or being introduced from some of the sets that are currently in Standard, like there's some of the Demon Hunter Initiate cards and Ashes of Outlands cards. They're going to be part of the core set moving forward, at least for this particular year, as well as new cards. There's 29 total absolutely new cards, 55 wild cards being introduced, and that really allows the Hearthstone team, allows Blizzard to shake up the format with the core set. And not only does it get rid of some of these perhaps negative play patterns, the Auctioneers and Blizzards or whatever of the world, that's just examples. It also can introduce, cool new stuff. We already know that like Edwin Van Cleef is going to be rotating out as part of the announcement when he was originally nerfed. So, there's room for a new rogue legendary. Maybe they bring back, say, Tess Greymane, right? Maybe they make something entirely new. And having the core set be the opportunity to kind of shift things around from year to year, rather than kind of the classic and basic sets being these pillars that you kind of just have to manage and avoid, and just deal with the fact that they exist. You get the opportunity to shape the format for Standard every year with the release of the core set, rather than try to have to release, Priest needs new AoE every year, because up until Shadowward Ruin, they had no good AoE in the core set, so you had to keep printing the Plague of Deaths and Psychic Screams and Mass Hysterias, every single set. You just get more flexibility rather than having every Standard format forever tied to what those classes just happen to have in the classic set was initially released. Also an opportunity to, say, for instance, Priest just got a rework not that long ago, the beginning of last year, if I remember correctly. If you look at the sort of core set for a lot of other classes, some of them are really good, right? Rogue has had a great classic and basic set for a long time. Warrior has, a lot of really good stuff with Brawl, Shield Block, Execute, etc. I expect to see a lot of that stuff stick around, but it would be interesting to see what a Standard that doesn't have Brawl looks like, right? What if there isn't Brawl? What if Warrior has different sorts of mass removal? And, I don't think that we want to see a world where there's no mass removal option for Warrior, but where it isn't just always Brawl forever would be great. Seeing, that it changes the dynamic of how you can play against a class for periods when that card is not included in the core set. And one of the most important things to me as a player who has competed in, played TCGs for 25 years is that dynamic nature of a card game. The fact that the game changes constantly with the release of every set, and now in Hearthstone with the core set update that will be coming presumably every year from now on, is an opportunity to re-engage and relearn and be continuously challenged by the new puzzles the game gives you to solve. And I find that much more interesting when those puzzles are more dynamic, because there's a shifting core set, than the existence of the sort of perpetual classic set that we've gotten used to. When I've argued for this in the past, one of the biggest things that people have brought up as an argument against the idea of a core set is cost, right? They're like, oh, well, if you introduce this rotating core set, it's going to be hard for people to keep up. And I argued, they could do what they did with Hall of Fame and just, make it so that you get your dust back whenever a card leaves the core set and a new card comes in, so you could always craft the new card. Well, they did much, much, much better than that, right? The entire core set is free to everyone. Not just people who already have the classic set. Everyone will get the core set for free once they level up their classes to 10. And I really can't overstate how big a deal this is. Because one of the biggest concerns that lots of people have had with Hearthstone for a long time is its accessibility. The cost of building a collection and getting to the point where you feel like you can make interesting decks. They've done a number of things over the past few years to combat that. Some things like duplicate protection for all rarities, things like getting a free deck, getting free Demon Hunter cards, all these sort of things. But this is the single biggest step that I think that we have seen, both in terms of giving content to existing players, but also to new players, right? If you're a new Hearthstone player with the introduction of the core set, you level your classes to 10 and you have the entire core set. There was a point when that meant you had every card in Hearthstone, back in classic Hearthstone. The game mode, which I'll touch on a little bit later, and that could require a pretty significant investment in terms of time or money. This is, you level to 10 and you have everything, all the core set cards. And that is just such an incredible barrier lifted in terms of can I build any decks, right? Obviously, there's still the need, if you want to be able to build everything, to get cards from expansions, but having that baseline to work from of the core set every single year, whether as a returning player who wants to come out and come and try it out, you just have stuff that you can play with, right? You can build new decks, you can experiment. You're not just tied to, this is the stuff that I had when I quit playing. You get new refresh stuff every time they refresh the core set. And also, you can recommend the game to a friend, be like, hey, come check this out. You start with a collection of hundreds of cards, right? You have enough cards to build decks of any class, because you have every core set card for every class once you hit level 10. That is huge. You guaranteed have a bunch of legendaries, so you can build interesting stuff, right? Whatever legendaries, are in the core set, you have. Like this, again, I cannot overstate how big a deal this is to the accessibility of Hearthstone. This is the single biggest change that has ever been made to the game to make it cheaper to play, to make it more accessible to a new player, to a returning player, in addition to providing existing longtime players a more dynamic and interesting gameplay experience by refreshing the cards that are in Standard every year. So that's why when I say I think this is the single biggest change and best change that Hearthstone has ever made, that's why. Because it is a massively positive change for literally everyone who touches Hearthstone in any way. So I think this change is tremendous, and I'm super excited to see more about the core set as it rolls out, what the cards will be that are being reintroduced from Wild. I've often been asked what cards I'd like to see added to the classic set from Wild, and my answer is almost always none of them, because I don't think there should be a classic set. And now, if you ask me what cards do I want to see in the core set, I can name tons, right? Illuminators, one that's always been on my mind. I've loved Illuminator since the earliest days. I think that Illuminator is actually a really interesting card in current Standard because of the way that it interacts with some of the secrets. Like an Illuminator with rigged fair game, if your opponent's attacking you to try and kill you, well, they're not trigger, or rather they aren't triggering your real rigged fair game, so your Illuminator's keeping you alive. Like you don't have ice block anymore, so it's not like quite as oppressive to just have something that they can't break without killing you, and then Anyway, that's just throwing one out there. But yeah, so I'm super excited for everything that we've heard so far related to the core set. And, really excited to learn more moving forward. As far as the classic format, I can kind of take it or leave it. Yes, I think there's an audience that exists that's really excited about the classic format. I've seen, people from the early days of Hearthstone, like Reynad and Kit Kats, like tweeting about like, oh, maybe I'll compete, maybe I'll come back and play, because that's when they played the game. And I think the nostalgia value of the format and, the opportunity for people who may not have been around Hearthstone then, who are interested in seeing what Hearthstone was like when it first began, is cool. I've frequently criticized the nature of the buffs and nerfs in the classic set as preventing people from having experiences that they had before, right? This is one of the things that I really advocated way back when they first introduced Wild and had the big set of buffs and nerfs, basically all nerfs, in Standard and Hall of Fame, some amount of cards was, now you can't play the decks that you played before. You can't play Force of Nature Savage War like they used to be, right? And I'm curious to see if, these cards are sort of sent to the legacy format and put back to where they were, in addition to the existence in the classic format where you can play them as they were. Like, for instance, will we see, like, Wild Growth in the core set, right? If we don't, will Wild Growth go into the legacy set and be unnerfed? Same thing with Force of Nature, right? Will we be able to like see these cards kind of reverted to how they were, so that people can play those decks even outside of the classic format? But I think that's a big role of what the classic format at least allows, is a glimpse into the past and an opportunity for people, again, to sort of relive the experiences that they had 6-7 years ago or whatever it was when Hearthstone first released. Or for people who were not part of the community then, have an opportunity to kind of get a taste of where things came from. So overall, I am super stoked about this announcement. Like I said, I think it is the absolute biggest change that Hearthstone has ever made. And on top of that, more deck slots, So overall, I am unbelievably excited for this particular change, and to see more about what's going to be coming down from Hearthstone and the core set in particular. What that new stuff is, what the returning things are. I love this sort of thing, and I am super excited for it. So let me know what you all think. Are you as excited as I am for the core set? What cards are you hoping to see come back from Wild? What sort of new cards are you looking for? Anyway, thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you next time.